Labour are once again getting themselves in a twist over public ownership. It all started with an interview the Shadow Chancellor gave to the Today programme.
You started by saying this was a bit of a rethink for your own party. Does this mean no to nationalisation of water, of energy companies, of trains when Labour get back in, if they do?
Well, I've set out fiscal rules that say all spending, all day-to-day spending will be funded by day-to-day tax
But is it no or yes to nationalisation?
Well, it's just within our fiscal rules to be spending billions of pounds on nationalising things. That just doesn't stack up against our fiscal rules.
OK, no, that's very clear, because those were a commitment, but just to be absolutely clear, they're not a commitment now.
Well, they were a commitment in a manifesto that secured our worst results since 1935.
Well, they were also a commitment made in Keir Starmer's leadership campaign. But putting dishonesty to one side, Reeves's comments were also completely economically illiterate. Her fiscal rule means that Labour won't borrow for current spending. So that's for things like wages or pensions. But it does allow Labour to borrow to spend on capital, which is exactly what nationalising the railways would represent. The logic here is pretty obvious. Railways also bring in revenue. Businesses buy assets for a reason. When you convert your cash into an asset, you haven't actually got poorer. You've borrowed to invest. That's what Labour are supposed to be doing. After the interview, a Labour spokesperson tried to clear the issue up. We are pragmatic about public ownership as long as it sits within our fiscal rules, a point Rachel was underlining in the interview by referencing this framework. For example, we know there is a positive role for rail in public ownership. So that seems like the Labour spokesperson rolling back a little bit, although, obviously repeating the illiterate nonsense about the fact that nationalising anything would go against the fiscal rules. You might have cases for or against nationalising, but it shouldn't have anything to do with this fiscal rule, which is about current spending. Moving on, Keir Starmer was then asked about the party's position during a speech announcing Labour's latest economic plans.
What exactly is your position on public ownership of energy and water firms? You appear to have ruled out nationalisation, yet you still have some interest in common ownership. Can you explain what that means?
Well, look, I take a pragmatic approach rather than an ideological one. I agree with what Rachel Reeves said this morning. Having come through the pandemic, it's very important that we have very, very clear priorities. And that's why we've set out fiscal rules already as an opposition. Rachel did that at conference last year. That's way ahead of the general election, setting out our priorities. And my priority, as I hope is obvious from this morning, is growth. The mission of the next Labour government will be growth. That partnership with business is where I see that growth coming from. So my approach here is pragmatic, not ideological. My mission is growth, and underpinning that mission is a partnership arrangement with business where the mission is set by an incoming Labour government and we empower business to work with us on delivering on that mission.
Every time he speaks, he reminds me of that Simpsons gag where you've got I think it's supposed to be, a centrist democratic politician. He's saying, and we will move forwards, not backwards, upwards, not downwards, and twirling, twirling, twirling towards freedom. I'm pragmatic, not ideological, and I like growth. What, who would disagree with that? In any case, it sounded there, like Keir Starmer was saying he agreed with Rachel Reeves, even though the spokesperson implied that she'd in fact misspoke. And the most clarity came from Shadow Transport Minister Louise Haigh. So following the confusion from both Starmer and Reeves, she wrote this on Twitter. UK Labour is committed to public ownership of rail and putting the public back in control of our bus network to drive down prices, improve services and meet net zero. And there she was quote tweeting something from Andy Burnham, who was celebrating Manchester's success in regulating or bringing into public ownership the buses there. Ash, the big day, which was supposed to be, Labour getting on the front foot when it came to the economy, it wasn't giving competence, was it?
Michael, I'm not voting for these people. I'm sorry. If I was in Chingford and Woodford Green, I would vote for Faiza Shaheen, but I don't live there. I'm not voting for these people, and let me tell you why. One, this is not screaming competence. This is not screaming with people with a vision. This is not screaming people with a plan. If you don't even know your own position on what you're going to renationalise and what you're not going to, please just off out of here. You're wasting everybody's time. I'm a busy woman. I have hobbies. I cannot with this kind of stuff. Two, there is a level of, I wouldn't even call it economic illiteracy. It is a unwillingness to put forward anything which might upset right-wing billionaire press barons. And so that means doing this, absolutely ludicrous communications Charleston, where you're like, oh, we're not going to nationalize, but oh, we're not saying we've changed our mind. And you've got various people giving out different messages at different points of the day because you want to keep, your voters on side, but more so than that, you don't want Viscount Rothermere to tear you a new one. Now, I'm sorry, a Labour government at some point is going to have to run the risk of annoying Rupert Murdoch, run the risk of annoying Viscount Rothermere, run the risk of annoying the Barclay brothers, because your interests, what you've been elected to do, are fundamentally incompatible with the interests of these right-wing billionaire press barons. So just fucking say something. There's also a point here about the emptiness of growth as a signifier for a better economy. Because yes, you might have an economy that's growing. And yes, in parts of our economy, there is growth. There is a growth of billionaire and oligarch wealth. That doesn't mean you have growth for everybody in terms of people's pay packets going up, the standard of living going up, the quality of their public services going up. And this is something I've not actually seen many people pick up on. Keir Starmer talking about growth and nothing else is essentially a trickle-down argument, that if you grow the economy, that wealth is going to trickle down and end up in the pockets of the lowest paid workers. Now, what we know after 40 years of trickle-down experimentation is that that is a total load of hooey. So not only is Keir Starmer being totally vacuous, which, let's be fair, isn't anything new for him, he's pushing an economic model which has been thoroughly discredited. So not just on the level of communications competence, but economic competence. I don't trust these people.